My daughter-in-law slapped me and humiliated me in front of her entire family on Christmas Day. That's when my millionaire son stepped forward and said 8 words that froze their bones. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end. And comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I should have known something was wrong the moment Bellamy answered the door that Christmas Eve. Her smile was too wide to practice, like she was performing for an invisible audience. Lorna, you made it, she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. I was starting to wonder if you changed your mind. I stepped into the foyer of Byron's mansion, the one I'd helped him buy 3 years ago when he married this woman. The marble floors gleamed under the crystal chandelier, and the scent of expensive candles filled the air. Everything looked perfect, just like Bellamy always insisted it should be. Where should I put this? I asked, holding out the homemade apple pie I'd spent all morning preparing. It was Byron's favorite since he was 7 years old. Bellamy's eyes flicked to the pie, and I caught the briefest flash of disdain before her smile returned. Oh, how sweet, the kitchen staff can find a place for it somewhere. Kitchen staff. As if this was some grand estate instead of a house where my son lived. I followed her through the living room where Byron's in-laws were already gathered around the fireplace, wine glasses in hand, laughing at something I hadn't heard. Everyone, look who finally decided to join us, Bellamy announced, her voice carrying that particular tone that made my stomach tighten. Byron's mother has arrived. The way she said it, Byron's mother, like I was some distant relative they were obligated to include, not Lorna, not grandma to their dead children, just Byron's mother. Byron looked up from his conversation with Bellamy's father and smiled, but I could see the tension around his eyes. Mom, I'm glad you're here. Come sit down. Actually, Bellamy interjected smoothly, I was hoping Lorna could help me in the kitchen for a few minutes. You know how these holiday dinners can be. My heart sank. This was how it always started, the requests for help that weren't really requests. The way she positioned me as a helper while she played hostess to her family and friends. In the kitchen, Bellamy's mask dropped completely. I need you to take over the dinner service, she said without preamble. My mother has been complaining about her arthritis, and I can't have her lifting heavy platters. Of course, I said quietly. It wasn't worth fighting. It never was. For the next hour, I found myself carrying dishes, refilling wine glasses, and clearing plates while Bellamy held court in the dining room. Every time I appeared with food, the conversation would pause just long enough for everyone to remember I was there, then resume as if I were invisible. Lorna, could you bring more bread? Bellamy called from her seat at the head of the table. Lorna, we need more wine. Her brother added without looking up. Lorna, the children's plates need to be cut smaller. Each request felt like a small paper cut, insignificant on its own, but adding up to something that made me feel smaller and smaller. I was 66 years old, and I was being treated like hired help in my own son's house. The breaking point came during dessert. I was carrying a tray of coffee cups when my arthritis-stiff fingers betrayed me. The tray tilted and hot coffee spilled across the white tablecloth, splashing onto Bellamy's designer dress. The silence that followed was deafening. Bellamy stood slowly, coffee dripping from her sleeve, her face transforming into something cold and ugly. Are you kidding me right now? I'm so sorry, I stammered, reaching for napkins. Let me clean it up. Don't touch anything else, she snapped, her voice rising. Do you have any idea how much this dress cost? Of course you don't. You probably shop at thrift stores. The cruelty in her voice made me flinch. Around the table, her family shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up. Even Byron seemed frozen, his fork halfway to his mouth. Bellamy, please, I said quietly. It was an accident, and she let out a harsh laugh. Everything with you is an accident, isn't it? You're just a clumsy old woman who can't do anything right. My cheeks burned with shame. I could feel everyone staring at me, and I wanted nothing more than to disappear into the floor. I think maybe I should go, I whispered. No, Bellamy said, stepping closer to me. I think you should understand something first. What happened next felt like it occurred in slow motion. I saw her hand rising, saw the cruel satisfaction in her eyes, but I couldn't move fast enough to stop it. The slap echoed through the dining room like a gunshot. My hand flew to my cheek, the sting spreading across my face like fire. In 38 years of marriage, my late husband had never raised a hand to me. No one had ever hit me before. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the children had stopped fidgeting in their chairs. Maybe now you'll remember your place, Bellamy said, her voice deadly quiet. That's when I heard the chair scrape against the floor. Byron stood up slowly, his napkin falling to the table, his face white with an emotion I couldn't quite read. For a moment, I thought he might finally defend me. Instead, he looked directly at his wife, his voice calm and measured in a way that made the hair on my arm stand up. Bellamy, he said, each word falling like ice into the silence, you just slapped the woman who owns everything you're standing on. The color drained from Bellamy's face so quickly, I thought she might faint. What? She whispered. Byron's eyes never left his wife's face. You just hit the owner of this house, the cars in the driveway, and the company that pays for every designer dress in your closet. I watched as understanding dawned in Bellamy's eyes, followed immediately by terror. The dining room remained frozen in that terrible silence for what felt like an eternity. Bellamy's hand was still raised from the slap, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Her family members looked between Byron and me with growing confusion and alarm. I don't understand, Bellamy finally managed to whisper. Byron walked around the table until he stood beside my chair. For the first time in years, I felt protected in this house. Of course you don't understand, he said, his voice still carrying that dangerous calm. You never bothered to ask any real questions about our family, did you? You just saw what you wanted to see. I touched my cheek where it still stung. Watching my daughter-in-law's world begin to crumble around her, part of me wanted to feel satisfaction, but mostly I just felt tired, so very tired of pretending to be less than I was. Bellamy, I said quietly, sit down, there are things you need to know. She sank into her chair as if her legs had given out. Her mother leaned forward, clearly trying to make sense of what was happening. Byron moved to the sideboard and pulled out a folder I hadn't noticed before. Mom's been waiting for this moment for 3 years, he said, setting the folder on the table. She wanted to see who you really were before she decided whether to trust you with the truth. My hands shook slightly as I opened the folder. Inside were documents I hadn't looked at in months, incorporation papers, property deeds, stock certificates, all bearing my name as the primary owner after Dad died 15 years ago. I began, my voice steadier than I felt. Everyone assumed I was just a grieving widow living off his life insurance. That's what I let them think. I pulled out the first document, the deed to the house we were sitting in. The truth is, I used that insurance money as seed capital. I started buying properties when the market crashed, small apartment buildings at first, then commercial spaces. I set the deed in front of Bellamy, this house. I bought it as an investment property 5 years ago. When Byron told me he was getting married, I decided to let you both live here. Bellamy stared at the paper like it might bite her. That's impossible. Byron bought this house with money I loaned him, Byron said, money that came from Mom's portfolio. I reached for another document, Hartwell Industries, you know, the company where Byron works as vice president. I own 75% of it. The blood drained from Bellamy's face completely now. Hartwell Industries was one of the most successful real estate development companies in the state. Byron's position there provided the income that funded their lavish lifestyle. No, she breathed. No, that can't be right. You're just what? I asked gently. Just a silly old woman who doesn't know anything about business? Just someone who should be grateful for whatever scraps of attention you throw my way. Her father cleared his throat uncomfortably. Perhaps we should go, he said to his wife. Yes, Byron said immediately. I think that would be best. As Bellamy's family gathered their things in awkward silence, I pulled out more documents, bank statements showing accounts with balances. That would make most people dizzy, stock portfolios that had grown exponentially over the past decade. Property listings for buildings I owned across 3 states. I've been watching you for 3 years, Bellamy, I said once her family had left. Watching how you treated me when you thought I was powerless. How you dismissed me, humiliated me, made me feel like an unwelcome guest in what you thought was your own home. Byron sat down across from us, his expression grim. I kept trying to give you chances to be better, he told his wife. I kept hoping you'd show some basic human decency to my mother, even if you thought she had nothing to offer you. But why? Bellamy's voice was barely a whisper. Why didn't you tell me? I leaned back in my chair, feeling something shift inside. Me, for 3 years, I'd hunched my shoulders and made myself small in this house. Now, I sat up straight, claiming my full space. Because I needed to know what kind of person you really were. I said, I needed to know if you could love my son. For himself, not for what he could provide. And I needed to know if you were someone I could trust with my family's legacy. Mom built her entire business in secret. Byron continued. She let people underestimate her because it gave her an advantage: real estate deals, corporate acquisitions, investment opportunities. No one expects a quiet widow to be a major player. I pulled out a photograph from the folder. A picture of me shaking hands with the mayor at a ribbon-cutting ceremony for one of my commercial developments. In the photo, I'm wearing a professional business suit, my hair styled, my posture confident. I looked like a completely different person from the woman who'd been serving coffee just an hour ago, last year, when you complained about my shabby clothes at your charity luncheon. I said. I had just come from a board meeting where I'd approved a $12 million development project. Bellamy's hands trembled as she reached for her wine glass. It was empty. The Mercedes in the driveway, Byron said, is registered to Mom. The vacation house in Aspen that you love so much. Mom's name is on the deed, the private school tuition for the kids, the designer clothes, the country club membership, all of it flows through companies that Mom owns. I watched my daughter-in-law process this information, saw the exact moment when she realized the full scope of her mistake. She hadn't just been cruel to some powerless old woman. She'd been systematically abusing the person who controlled every aspect of her comfortable life. I could have stopped it at any time, I told her quietly. With one phone call, I could have had you both evicted from this house. With one signature, I could have had Byron transferred to our offices in Alaska. But I wanted to give you every possible chance to show me that underneath all that cruelty, there might be a decent person. Mom, Byron said softly, she's had 3 years of chances. I nodded slowly. Yes, she has. And tonight, when she hid me in front of my grandchildren, she showed me exactly who she is. Bellamy finally found her voice. What are you going to do? I looked at this woman who had made my life miserable for 3 years, who had turned family gatherings into exercises in humiliation, who had just struck me across the face in my own house. That, I said, closing the folder, depends entirely on what you do next. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire ready to snap. Bellamy sat rigid in her chair, her designer dress still stained with coffee, her face pale as porcelain. I could practically see the wheels turning in her head as she tried to find some angle, some way to manipulate herself out of this situation. I need to understand something, she said finally, her voice taking on that sweet, manipulative tone I'd learned to recognize over the years. Are you saying you've been lying to us this whole time? Playing some kind of sick game? Byron let out a bitter laugh. Sick game? Mom, tell her about the recording from last Thanksgiving. My stomach tightened. I'd hoped we wouldn't have to go there, but Bellamy had pushed us past the point of mercy. What recording? Bellamy's voice cracked slightly. I reached into the folder and pulled out a small digital recorder, setting it on the table between us. I started documenting things about 2 years ago. I said quietly when I realized the pattern wasn't going to change. You recorded me? I recorded family gatherings, I corrected, including the conversation you had with your sister last Thanksgiving when you thought I was napping in the guest room. Bellamy's face went white. I could see her trying to remember what she'd said, what secrets she'd spilled when she thought no one was listening. Byron reached over and pressed play. Bellamy's voice filled the room, crystal clear and full of contempt. I swear if that old bat stays much longer, I'm going to lose my mind. She acts like she belongs here, like this is her house or something. Byron keeps making excuses for her, but honestly, I think it's time she moved to one of those assisted living places. She's becoming such a burden. Her sister's voice responded. Can't Byron just talk to her? He's too soft. But I've got a plan. If I make her uncomfortable enough, she'll eventually get the hint and leave on her own. I've been putting her in the guest room instead of the master suite when she visits, making her help with the housework, you know. Little things that remind her she's not really welcome here. The recording continued. The truth is, I never wanted her living so close anyway. Byron sends her money every month. Can you believe that? Money we could be using for the kids' private schools or that vacation house I want in the Hamptons. But no, we have to support his needy mother who never planned properly for retirement. I watched Bellamy's face crumble as her own words condemned her when the recording ended. The silence was deafening. I didn't mean, she started. Which part didn't you mean? Byron asked, his voice deadly quiet. The part where you called my mother an old bat. The part where you admitted to deliberately making her uncomfortable in her own house. Or the part where you complained about the money I send her. Money that, as it turns out, came from her own investments in the first place. Bellamy turned to me, tears starting to form in her eyes. But they weren't tears of remorse, they were tears of panic. Of someone who realized they'd been caught. Lorna, please, you have to understand. I was just venting to my sister. Everyone says things they don't mean when they're stressed. Stressed? I repeated. You were stressed about what exactly? About living rent-free in $1 million house. About having all your bills paid and your children's future secured? About having a lifestyle most people can only dream of? I reached for another document from the folder. Do you want to know what real stress looks like? Bellamy. This is a financial breakdown of everything that's been provided to you in Byron over the past 3 years. I spread the papers across the table like playing cards. House payment, $3,600 a month. Car payments for both vehicles, $800 monthly, insurance, utilities, property taxes, another $1,500. Private school tuition for both children, $4,000 per month, your clothing allowance, $2,000 monthly. Country club membership, $800, and that doesn't include vacations, dining out, or the various emergencies that always seem to require immediate cash infusions. Mrs. Bellamy stared at the numbers, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. In 3 years, I continued, you've consumed approximately $450. Zero of resources that you contributed nothing toward earning, and in return, you treated me like hired help in my own property. Byron stood up and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. I kept thinking you'd change, he said without turning around. I kept believing that underneath all the entitled behavior, there was a decent person who was just, I don't know, overwhelmed by the lifestyle change. I love you, Bellamy said desperately, reaching toward him. I love our family. I can change, I can be better. Can you? Asked. Because this isn't the first time you've promised to change. Do you remember last Christmas when you made me sit at the children's table? Because you needed the adult seats for your real guests, you apologized then, too, or Easter. Byron added, finally turning around, when you told everyone at dinner that Mom was getting forgetful and couldn't be trusted with important family decisions. She's 66, Bellamy, not 96, her mind is sharp as a tack. Or my birthday in June, I said softly, when you gave me a gift card to the discount store while showing off the diamond earrings. Byron bought you. You told everyone the gift card was more practical for someone on a fixed income. Each example hit like a physical blow. I watched Bellamy realize that we'd been cataloging her cruelties for years, that nothing had gone unnoticed or unremembered. I didn't know, she whispered. I didn't know about the money, about the business. If I had known, if you had known I was wealthy, you would have treated me differently. I leaned forward. That's exactly the problem, Bellamy. You treated me badly because you thought I was powerless. Your kindness was conditional on what you thought I could do for you. Byron returned to the table and sat down heavily. Mom owns controlling interest in my company. Bellamy. She could fire me tomorrow if she wanted to. She could have had us evicted any time in the past 3 years. She could have cut off every financial stream that supports our lifestyle. But she didn't because she was hoping you'd show some basic human decency. I can show you those bank statements if you like, I said, pulling out another document. The account that your household expenses come from, it's mine. The trust fund that's been set up for the children's college education. My money, the investment portfolio that Byron thinks he's been building. Seeded entirely with my capital. Bellamy's hands shook as she reached for the papers. I watched her scan the numbers. Watched her realize that every comfort she'd enjoyed, every luxury she'd taken for granted had come from the woman she'd been systematically humiliating. What do you want from me? She asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I sat back in my chair and looked at this woman who had made my life so difficult for so long. That's the wrong question, Bellamy. The question is, what are you willing to do to make this right? Anything, she said quickly. I'll do anything. Anything? Byron repeated. Because Mom's already drawn up some papers that outline exactly what anything looks like. I reached for the final document in the folder, the one I'd hoped I wouldn't have to use, but had prepared just in case. These are the terms under which you can continue to live in this house and remain part of this family. Bellamy grabbed the papers eagerly, but as she read, her face went ashen. You can't be serious, she breathed. Deadly serious, I replied. Those are your options, all of them non-negotiable. The papers trembled in her hands as the full weight of her situation finally hit her. She had two choices, and neither one would allow her to maintain the illusion of power she constructed over the past 3 years. The real question was whether her pride would let her accept either of them. Bellamy's hands shook as she read the document for the third time, as if the words might somehow change if she stared at them long enough. Her face had gone through several shades of pale, finally settling on a sickly gray that made her look genuinely ill. You want me to sign a behavior contract? Her voice cracked on the last word. It's not a want, I said calmly. It's a requirement for continued residence in this house and continued access to the lifestyle you've become accustomed to. Byron moved his chair closer to mine, a united front that Bellamy couldn't miss. Read the terms out loud, he said. I want to make sure you understand every single one. Bellamy's eyes darted between us, looking for some sign of mercy or compromise. Finding none, she began to read with a voice that grew smaller with each word. Term 1. Bellamy Harrison will treat Lorna Harrison with the respect and courtesy due to the head of this household at all times, in private and in public. She swallowed hard. Term 2. Bellamy will attend monthly family dinners at which she will personally prepare and serve the meal to demonstrate her commitment to family service. Keep going, Byron said when she paused. Term 3. All household expenses will be reviewed and approved by Lorna Harrison before payment. This includes, but is not limited to, clothing purchases, entertainment expenses, children's activities, and personal care services. Her voice was barely a whisper. Now, Term 4. Bellamy will issue written apologies to all family members and friends who witnessed disrespectful behavior toward Lorna Harrison over the past 3 years. And the final term, I prompted. Bellamy's voice broke completely. Term 5. Bellamy acknowledges that this agreement can be terminated at any time by Lorna Harrison, resulting in immediate forfeiture of all financial support and housing arrangements. She set the papers down and looked up at me with something approaching desperation. This is humiliating, is it? I asked. More humiliating than making me eat in the kitchen while your family enjoy Christmas dinner? More humiliating than telling your friends I was becoming a burden? More humiliating than slapping me in front of my grandchildren? Byron leaned forward. Mom, show her the alternative. I reached for one more document I kept separate from the others. This is option 2, I said, placing it in front of Bellamy. A separation agreement that Byron and I drew up last month. The color that had been slowly returning to Bellamy's face drained away. Again as she read, a divorce settlement, she whispered. A very generous one considering the circumstances. Byron said you'd receive a lump sum payment of $50,000, temporary use of the smaller car for 6 months, and shared custody of the children with standard visitation rights. $50,000. Bellamy's voice rose to a near shriek. That's nothing. This house alone is worth over $1 million. This house that you have no legal claim to. I reminded her gently. Your name isn't on the deed, remember. In fact, let me show you something interesting. I pulled out yet another document. This is a prenuptial agreement you signed before marrying Byron. Do you remember what it says about marital assets? Bellamy grabbed the paper, scanning it frantically. I watched her face as she realized what she was reading. In the event of divorce initiated by behavioral misconduct, Byron quoted from memory, the non-contributing spouse waives all claims to property, investments, and ongoing financial support beyond the minimal settlement outlined in Appendix C. You tricked me, Bellamy said, her voice full of accusation. You made me sign this when I thought you were just a middle management employee. I tricked you? Byron's voice was dangerously quiet. You signed a legal document without reading it carefully. You made assumptions about our financial situation without asking questions. You chose to marry me believing I was worth less than I actually am. And now you're angry that your gold-digging strategy wasn't more successful. The words hung in the air like a slap. Bellamy flinched as if Byron had physically struck her. That's not. I didn't marry you for money, she protested weakly, didn't you? I asked. Because we have recordings of several conversations where you discuss my son's earning potential and your plans to upgrade your lifestyle through marriage. Byron stood up and walked to a cabinet I hadn't noticed before, returning with a small recording device. This one's from your bachelorette party, he said, setting it on the table. Your maid of honor asked if you were sure you wanted to marry me, and your response was quite enlightening. Bellamy's eyes widened in horror. You recorded my bachelorette party? Your sister recorded it, I corrected, and then she sent copies to Byron when she got tired of watching you mistreat his family. Even your own family is disgusted with your behavior, Bellamy. That's impossible. Sarah would never. Byron pressed play, and Bellamy's voice filled the room again. But this time she sounded drunk and careless. Byron's perfect husband material, stable job, good income. And his mother won't be around forever. Once she's out of the picture, we'll have complete control over the household finances. He's so devoted to family that he'll do whatever I say as long as I make him think it's what's best for everyone. The recording continued with Bellamy describing her plans to isolate Byron from his mother to convince him that I was becoming a burden that needed to be managed. She talked about nursing homes and assisted living facilities like she was planning my funeral. When it ended, Bellamy was crying, not the pretty, delicate tears of a woman seeking sympathy, but the ugly, desperate sobs of someone who realized they'd been completely exposed. Sarah sent this to you, she asked Byron. 20 months ago. He confirmed, along with a letter apologizing for not speaking up sooner. She said she couldn't stand watching you destroy a good man's relationship with his mother. Even your own sister recognizes what you've become, I said softly. The question now is whether you can recognize it too. Bellamy wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing her makeup. What if I choose to contract? What if I agree to your terms? Then you'll live under them. Byron said simply. Every day for as long as Mom chooses to allow it, no exceptions. No negotiations, no complaints, and if I choose the divorce, I gathered the papers back into the folder. Then you'll pack your personal belongings tonight, sign the separation agreement tomorrow, and move into whatever life $50,000 can buy. You. What about the children? The children will remain in their home, Byron said firmly, with their father and their grandmother, who actually loves them. You'll see them according to the custody schedule, assuming you can afford a suitable place for visitation. Bellamy looked around the dining room at the expensive chandelier, the custom furniture, the artwork on the walls, all of it representing a lifestyle she'd taken for granted, assuming it was hers by right of marriage. How long do I have to decide? She asked. Tonight, I said. Before you go to bed, you'll choose one of those two options. There is no third choice, and there's no more time for consideration. You've had 3 years to decide what kind of person you wanted to be in this family. Tonight, you'll live with the consequences of that choice. Byron checked his watch. It's 9:30 now, the children are asleep, the dishes are done. And we've said everything that needs to be said. You have until midnight. Bellamy stared at the two documents in front of her. The behavior contract and the divorce settlement. Her tears had stopped, but her hands still trembled as she touched each paper. Can I call my mother? Of course, I said. But I should mention that your parents received copies of all these recordings last week, along with a detailed explanation of the situation. They're welcome to offer you advice, but they've already made it clear they won't be providing financial support for any decision you make. The last bit of hope drained from Bellamy's face. She was truly alone with her choice, just as she'd made me feel alone for 3 years. I need some air, she said, standing unsteadily. Take all the air you need, Byron replied. But remember, midnight deadline. As Bellamy walked toward the patio doors, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, complete control over my own life. Whatever she chose, I would finally be free from her manipulation and cruelty. The only question now was whether she had enough pride left to choose dignity, or if desperation would force her to accept the humbling terms of staying. I watched through the patio doors as Bellamy paced back and forth on the deck, her phone pressed to her ear. From her animated gestures and the way she kept running her hands through her hair, I could tell the conversation wasn't going well. Who do you think she's calling? Byron asked, settling into the chair beside me. Everyone, I said with certainty. Her mother, her sister, probably some of her friends. Anyone who might tell her what she wants to hear. Through the glass, I could see Bellamy's face growing more desperate with each call. Her shoulders sagged a little more after each conversation ended. "Are you having second thoughts?" Byron asked quietly. About the ultimatum, I considered the question seriously. 3 years of humiliation, of being made to feel small in my own house, of watching my son's wife systematically try to erase me from family gatherings and decisions. 3 years of biting my tongue and hoping things would improve. "No," I said finally. "I'm done being the understanding one. I'm done making excuses for behavior that would be unacceptable from a stranger, let alone family." Byron nodded, but I could see the conflict in his eyes, despite everything. Despite the recordings and the evidence of Bellamy's true nature, he was still processing the end of his marriage. "Do you think I'm being too harsh?" I asked him. He was quiet for a long moment, watching his wife through the window. "I think," he said slowly, "that you've been far more patient than she deserved. And I think I should have stood up to her years ago instead of hoping she'd change on her own." At 10:15, Bellamy came back inside. Her eyes were red-rimmed and her carefully styled hair was disheveled from running her hands through it. "I talked to my mother," she said without preamble, "and she said, I made my bed and now I have to lie in it." Bellamy's voice was bitter. "She said she's ashamed of how I've treated you and that I need to figure out how to fix it myself." I wasn't surprised. I'd spoken to Bellamy's mother several times over the years, and she was a decent woman who'd clearly been horrified by the recordings I'd shared. "What about your sister?" Byron asked. Bellamy's face crumpled slightly. "Sarah said she'd been waiting for this conversation for 2 years. She said she almost warned you about me herself, but she hoped I'd come to my senses first." The weight of complete isolation was settling on Bellamy's shoulders. For 3 years, she'd acted like she was the center of the universe, never considering that her behavior was being observed and judged by others. "I called my lawyer, too," she continued. "He reviewed the prenup and said it's ironclad. He said I'd be lucky to get the $50,000 offering." Byron and I exchanged glances. Of course she called a lawyer. Even facing complete ruin, Bellamy's first instinct was to look for an angle, a way to manipulate the situation to her advantage. "So, what's your decision?" I asked. Bellamy sat down heavily in her chair, looking older than her 32 years. "I need to understand something first. If I sign the contract, if I agree to your terms, would you really follow through? Would you really humiliate me in front of people?" "Humiliate you?" I repeated. "Asking you to treat me with basic respect isn't humiliation. Asking you to apologize for 3 years of cruelty isn't humiliation. Those are consequences. But the monthly dinners where I have to serve you. You mean like how you made me serve your family tonight? Like how you've made me play housemaid at every gathering for 3 years?" She flinched. "That was different." "How?" Byron asked. "How was that different?" Bellamy struggled to find an answer that didn't make her sound even worse. I thought that's what mothers-in-law were supposed to do. Help out occasionally." "Yes," I said. "Be treated like hired staff." "No. There's a difference between contributing to family meals and being relegated to servant status. While everyone else relaxes, if I sign this contract," Bellamy said slowly, "and I follow all the rules, how long would it last?" "As long as you live in my house," I replied. "As long as you benefit from my financial support. As long as you're part of this family." "That could be forever." "Yes, it could be. Or it could be until you prove you've genuinely changed." "But Bellamy, the behavior I'm requiring isn't extraordinary. It's basic human decency. If following these rules feels like a burden to you, that says more about who you are than it does about the fairness of the rules." She was quiet for several minutes, staring at the 2 documents on the table. I could practically see her weighing her options. Sign the contract and live comfortably but under my authority. Or take the divorce settlement and start over with almost nothing. "What about the children?" she asked suddenly. If I sign this, how would it affect them?" Byron leaned forward. "You mean would they see their mother being held accountable for her actions? Would they learn that treating people badly has consequences? I think that would be good for them. But they'd see me serving dinner, apologizing to people. They'd see you taking responsibility." I corrected. "They'd see you showing respect to their grandmother. They'd see you working to repair the damage you've done." "Is that really such a terrible example to set?" Bellamy's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and her face went pale. What is it? Byron asked my friend Jennifer. She said she heard I was having marital difficulties. She wanted to know if I needed a place to stay. Bellamy looked up at us with something approaching panic. Word is already getting out, isn't it? People are going to know what, I asked, that your marriage hit a rough patch. That happens too. Lots of couples. They're going to know I'm being controlled, managed. They're going to pity me. The way you taught them to pity me, I asked quietly. The way you encouraged them to see me as a burden. As someone who'd overstayed their welcome in their own son's life. Byron stood up and walked to the window again. Bellamy, for 3 years. You've cared more about what other people think than about how you've treated the people who actually matter. Even now, facing the consequences of your choices. You're worried about your image instead of thinking about whether you've been wrong. I know I've been wrong, she said quickly. I know I've hurt you both. I don't know how to fix it, yes? You do, I said. You fix it by choosing to be better. You fix it by putting your family's well-being ahead of your pride. You fix it by accepting that actions have consequences and working to make amends. At 11:30, Bellamy was still sitting at the table, staring at the documents. Her phone had buzzed several more times, but she'd stopped answering. 15 more minutes. Byron said gently, I know. Her voice was barely a whisper. Bellamy, I said, I want you to understand something. These terms aren't meant to punish you forever. They're meant to reset our relationship, to give us a chance to build something healthy instead of the toxic dynamic we've had. But you'll always have power over me, she said. You'll always be able to threaten to throw me out. I've always had that power, I reminded her. For 3 years, I've had the ability to end your comfortable lifestyle with a phone call. The difference is that now you know it. Now you can't take it for granted. And if I choose a divorce, Byron answered, then you'll leave with your dignity, intact in the freedom to build whatever life you want. It won't be the life you're used to, but it will be entirely yours. At 11:55, Bellamy reached for a pen. Which document are you signing? I asked. She looked at me with eyes full of tears, and something that might have been regret. I'm choosing to stay, she said quietly. I'm choosing to try to earn back what I threw away. She signed the behavior contract with a shaking hand, her tears dropping onto the paper. This doesn't mean I forgive you, I said as she finished. Forgiveness will have to be earned over time. But it does mean I'm willing to give you a chance to prove you can change. Bellamy nodded, unable to speak. Your first official act under this contract, I continued, will be to clean up the coffee you spilled during your tantrum earlier. And tomorrow you'll call each person who was here tonight and apologize for the scene you created. I understand, she whispered as Bellamy moved to clear the dining room table. I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness. I had my power back, my dignity restored. But I also knew that the real test would come in the months ahead, as we all learned to navigate this new reality. The question now wasn't whether Bellamy would follow the rules, but whether she was capable of genuine change or if she was simply acting out of desperation to maintain her lifestyle. 6 months later, I sat in my favorite armchair in the living room, watching through the window as Bellamy worked in the garden with my grandchildren. The sight would have seemed impossible a year ago. But here we were. The changes hadn't been immediate or easy. For the first month after signing the contract, Bellamy had moved through the house like a ghost, fulfilling her obligations with mechanical precision, but no warmth. She served dinners without conversation, issued apologies that sounded rehearsed, and treated her interactions like business transactions. I began to wonder if I'd won a hollow victory, if I'd simply traded one form of dysfunction for another. The turning point came during the 3rd month when my grandson Tommy fell off his bike and scraped his knee badly. Bellamy had been in the kitchen preparing one of her required monthly dinners. When she heard him crying, she dropped everything and ran outside, gathering him in her arms with genuine concern, speaking to him with a tenderness I hadn't seen from her in years. When she brought him inside to clean the wound, she looked at me with something approaching vulnerability. Could you help me? She asked quietly. I think it might need stitches. It was the first time in 3 years she'd asked for my help instead of demanding my service. Something shifted between us in that moment, some small crack in the wall of resentment and pride. Of course, I'd said, and we'd worked together to care for Tommy, falling into the kind of natural cooperation that should have existed all along. Now, watching her patiently help my granddaughter plant marigolds, I could see genuine changes. The forced smiles had been replaced by real ones. The brittle politeness had softened into something more authentic. "She's different now," Byron said, joining me at the window. "Really different. Not just performing differently." I nodded. "It took longer than I expected." "Did you think she wouldn't change at all?" "I honestly wasn't sure. I hoped she would. But I was prepared for the possibility that she was just going through the motions. Until she found another option." Byron poured himself coffee from the pot. That Bellamy had made that morning. Another small change. She'd started anticipating needs instead of waiting to be asked. The apology letters helped. He said that had been perhaps the most difficult part of the contract for Bellamy to fulfill. Writing personal apologies to each family member and friend who'd witnessed her behavior over the years had forced her to confront the full scope of her actions. Some people have been gracious in their responses. Others have been brutally honest about how her treatment of me had affected their opinion of her. "Your mother's response was particularly enlightening," I said with a slight smile. Byron chuckled. "I think I'm disappointed, but not surprised." It was actually harder for Bellamy to read than if Mom had been openly angry. The sound of laughter from the garden drew our attention. Back to the window. Bellamy was showing the children how to make mud pies. Her designer clothes dirty, and her hair escaping from its usually perfect style. She looked more relaxed than I'd ever seen her. "Do you trust her now?" Byron asked. It was a complicated question. "I trust that she's learned the consequences of her previous behavior," I said carefully. "I trust that she understands the relationship has permanently changed. Whether the first trust her motivations, that's still developing." The front door opened and Bellamy came in with the children, all of them covered in garden soil and grinning. "Grandma." "Lorna," my granddaughter called out. "Mama showed us how to plant flowers for you, did she?" I smiled at the little girl, then looked at Bellamy. "That was very thoughtful." "The marigolds should bloom in about 6 weeks," Bellamy said, her voice still carrying some uncertainty when she spoke directly to me. "I remember you mentioning they were your favorites." It was true. I had mentioned it almost 2 years ago. In passing, the fact that she remembered surprised me. "Thank you," I said simply. After the children had been cleaned up and settled in front of a movie, Bellamy approached me hesitantly. "Lorna, could I ask you something?" "Of course. The contract, it says you can terminate it at any time. Have you ever been tempted to in these past months?" I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or calculation. Instead, I saw genuine nervousness and what might have been hope. "There were moments," I admitted, "particularly in the beginning when it felt like you were just going through the motions. But no, I haven't been tempted to end it." "What changed your mind about those early moments?" "You did," I said simply, slowly. "But you changed. The woman who helped Tommy with his scraped knee wasn't the same person who slapped me at Christmas dinner. The woman who spent her afternoon teaching my grandchildren to garden isn't the same person who complained about my presence in this house." Bellamy's eyes filled with tears, but they seemed to be tears of relief, rather than frustration. "I know I can't undo the past 3 years," she said quietly. "I know saying I'm sorry isn't enough to erase the hurt I caused. But I want you to know that I'm not just following the contract anymore. I'm trying to become the person I should have been all along." "I can see that," I said, "and I appreciate it. Do you think someday we could be a real family the way you and Byron are?" It was the most vulnerable I'd ever seen her, standing there in my living room with dirt under her fingernails and hope in her eyes. "I think," I said carefully, "that we're already heading in that direction. Family isn't just about blood, Bellamy. It's about respect, consideration, and genuine care for each other's well-being. You're learning those things." She nodded, wiping her eyes. The contract helped me understand what I'd been missing. It made me pay attention to how my words and actions affected other people. That's exactly what it was designed to do. Byron appeared in the doorway, car keys in hand. "I'm running to the store. Do either of you need anything? I could use some potting soil for the herb garden," Bellamy said, "and maybe some of those cookies Mom likes. The ones from the bakery on 5th Street. The casual way she said Mom when referring to me made my chest tighten with unexpected emotion. It was the first time she'd used that term without it sounding forced or calculated. After Byron left, Bellamy sat down across from me. "Can I tell you something?" she asked. "When I signed that contract, I hated you. I thought you were a vindictive old woman who was using her money to control people." I raised an eyebrow but said nothing. But I was wrong, you weren't controlling me. You were teaching me all those rules, all those requirements, they weren't punishments. They were lessons in how to be a decent human being, and now I understand that you could have thrown me out that very night. You could have destroyed my life with a phone call. Instead, you gave me a chance to learn and grow, even when I didn't deserve it. I leaned back in my chair, thinking about the woman who'd slapped me 6 months ago, and the woman sitting across from me now. Everyone deserves a chance to change, Bellamy. But not everyone takes advantage of that chance. I almost didn't. She admitted in those first weeks, I was just counting down the days until I could find a way out. But then I realized that the way out wasn't about escaping the contract. It was about becoming someone who didn't need to escape it. That evening, as we sat down for dinner, a meal Bellamy had prepared and served with genuine care rather than resentful obligation. I looked around the table at my family. Byron was relaxed in a way he hadn't been in years. The children were chattering happily about their day, and Bellamy was participating in the conversation with real interest rather than forced politeness. "Grandma Lorna," my grandson said suddenly, "are you happy now?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean, sweetheart? You smile more now," he said matter-of-factly. "And Mama doesn't look sad anymore when she talks to you out of the mouths of babes." I glanced at Bellamy, who was blushing slightly. "Yes," I said, looking around the table at all of them. "I'm very happy now." Later that night, as I was getting ready for bed, I found a note that had been slipped under my bedroom door. In Bellamy's handwriting, it simply said, "Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for showing me who I could become." I folded the note carefully and placed it in my jewelry box, next to the contract that had changed all our lives. The contract I now knew I would never need to enforce again. We had finally become a real family, not perfect, but real, built on respect rather than fear, on genuine affection rather than obligation. It had taken 6 months of careful rebuilding, but we'd found our way to something better than what we'd lost. Sometimes the best gift you can give someone is a chance to become the person they're meant to be, even when, especially when, they don't realize they need that chance. As I turned off the light and settled into bed, I smiled, thinking about the marigolds that would bloom in my garden in 6 weeks. Flowers planted by hands that had once struck me in anger, but now worked alongside me in love. Change, real change, was possible after all. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. Thank you for watching until here.